In the 26 years of discussions on the D-word and the 5 years we've been doing these face-to-faces, I mean, we're constantly coming up against, well, with discussions about festivals. We have a festivals topic on the D-word, and we get a lot of complaints from filmmakers about festivals. Why are, they're not even looking at my film. I look up on Vimeo and it's stopped after a minute. Why are they charging so much money for submissions? How come I'm not getting feedback on my submission? What is it they even do? It's kind of a, so having been to many festivals and being on the board of Full Frame, the advisory board for about 10 years, I've gotten a lot of insight into how festivals work, and really wanted to do a program like today where we welcome two very experienced programmers, or in Deirdre's case, executive director of one of the great festivals, Full Frame, to kind of break down what it is that festival programmers actually do and get some, and how understanding their role actually will help you increase your chances of getting into festivals and making the best use of the festival experience. So we welcome today Andrea Passafiume, who has programmed for, well, currently for Tribeca and Sundance, Seattle Deaf Film Festival. You've been with Hot Docs. I'm sorry, Hot Docs Doc NYC, many others. And Deirdre, who is a producer and consultant, as well as vice president of Art House Convergence, which I'll ask you about later, what that's about. And of course, ran Full Frame for a decade. So I want to kick things off. I mean, we'll get to a lot of different things, but why don't we start with festivals? Because we'll talk about a little bit wider, wider aspects of programming as well. How did each of you get into, Andrea, how did you start as a programmer? How does one become a festival programmer? It sounds like fun, but what was the steps that got you there?
Sure, absolutely. So I went to college and grad school, studied film history. I went to NYU's Tisch Cinema Studies program. I got a bachelor's and a master's, and kind of film programming wasn't really on my radar, mostly because I had, I was the first person in my family to have any, passion for that and to pursue that sort of a career. So I had to find my own way. So I started my career at Turner Broadcasting at Turner Classic Movies in Atlanta, Georgia, and that was great. I love Turner and Turner Classic Movies. Met my husband there, who's an editor, and then we went out to LA together, and that's when I got involved with the American Film Institute. I started going to screenings at AFI, and it dawned on me that AFI was sort of the perfect place for me because I was kind of a natural programmer, and I'm a good writer. I'm good speaking in front of crowds. I'm good at programming and all that. So I set up a meeting with the head of AFI Fest out there at the time, and this is the mid 2000s. And I met with her, and it was Nancy Collet. Some of you probably know her. And at the time, and she said, you know what, a really good place to start is volunteer. And that was great advice. I tell everybody to sort of do that because it helped give me a great insight into film festivals. So I started out as a volunteer with AFI Fest out there, doing everything from clicking off, crowd numbers and physically counting ballots by hand and doing all the things. If you want, somebody can mute. I think we're hearing some feedback.
Yeah,
Anyway, doing every sort of thing you can do behind the scenes at festivals. And eventually a spot opened up when one of the programmers went on maternity leave, and I dove in head first and just got involved with everything around programming. And I found that documentaries were sort of the things I loved the most to program. And then eventually we came out here to DC, and I connected with Silverdocs, which was thriving at the time. And Sky hired me as her associate programmer, and I eventually made my way to head programmer there, and I've been programming ever since with different festivals, and it's been a really perfect fit for me.
Thanks. Deirdre, what was your path towards, heading up Full Frame?
Well, I'd love to speak to the programmer aspect because that's where the
Sure.
focus is, because of course I hire programmers. So when I look to hire a programmer, Andrea's path is very similar to what we're talking about. I've had programmers who had their major in film studies. I've had programmers with a PhD in film studies, but I've also hired programmers who come from a different background. To me, what you might not know about programmers, and I just want to add that I was one of the founders, and I was the founding vice president of the Film Festival Alliance. So we can talk about the ethics of film festivals narrowly. Is that they're the most equally left and right brain people I know. To me, programmers are born. So when somebody comes in and interviews for me, I'm looking for both things. I'm looking for the soft quality of being able to look at creative work with soft eyes, but I'm also looking for the person that can work on a grid, like a monster, like an MF, and really make that grid sing. Many of them that I've hired before have had that same path of they start off as an associate or a co-programmer, and they work their way up into programmer. That's a very common route because the festival director, like myself, can trust they know our system. I'm not hiring from without. So a lot of times, you're really hiring from within if you lose your lead programmer. But very often have a background in film. One of my favorite programmers was a library science major. She had been working in libraries most of her career, and again, had that left brain, right brain ability to organize, to keep things organized, but also to be able to look at work with a critical eye. So I hope that's helpful. My path was, I was an actor. And we were in Los Angeles. We had a child in Los Angeles. My husband was also an actor. He became a theater director, still is a theater director, a pretty successful one. And we moved to North Carolina, and I had a 6-year-old and was still flying back and forth to LA. And when Nancy Bursky stepped away from Full Frame, a lot of people asked me to apply. I didn't. And then at the last minute, they hadn't really hired anybody. And I think I interviewed on a Thursday and I was hired by the next Monday. So it was just the right combination. I'd worked in legal, in entertainment law. I'd, produced a documentary at that point. I just had a lot of different other qualities. Like Andrea, I'm very comfortable speaking in front of a crowd. And I know how to fundraise. So all of those aspects are essential for a festival director.
Yeah. Speaking of fundraising and of funds, can you give an idea of what the pie is, the financing pie is of a festival? How much of it is, submissions from filmmakers? How much is it tickets? How much is sponsors?
Yeah, that's changed a lot since COVID. And I ran an art house as we came out of COVID. So I haven't looked narrowly at the festival model since. But I can tell you that submissions do not cover the work that is required generally. And that was something way back when Sean Farnell had written a very critical article about festival submission fees. We at the Film Festival Alliance actually took the data and said, no, that's not the case. And it includes the larger festivals with the bigger fees, because the bigger the festival, the bigger the footprint, the bigger the bills. So sponsorships are the largest piece of the income pie, at least at Full Frame they were. submissions were very, very tiny. I think it was 10% off the top of my head. Ticket sales, maybe 25%. Because remember, you're only selling tickets for a few days, even if you're a 2-week-long festival. It's a very confined time to make earned revenue. So you have half the pie, which is unearned revenue, donations, sponsorships, things that are tax deductible, grants. And then you have the earned revenue, which would be tickets and advertising, which would be a kind of sponsorship where there's a quid pro quo. That is not a lot of money. And I think the thing that filmmakers miss, which quite frankly can make me irritated, is that nobody in the film festival world is wealthy. Nobody's getting rich. In fact, the majority of film festivals are run by volunteers. The majority of film festivals, if you look at the Film Festival Alliance website, have incomes of budgets of less than $1 million. Less than $1 million. So for a year of having some full-time employees, paying their benefits, taking care of people, that is not a lot of money. They do an enormous amount of work in programming that is underthought of and undercompensated, and work easily, I would say, at full frame for the last quarter of the year leading up to the festival. It gets heavier and heavier, but programming is working anywhere from a 12-hour day to a 16-hour day as you get closer.
I have questions and we'll get back to that, but I want to kind of focus now on the submissions process a bit. And, generally speaking, I mean, I know it differs from festival to festival. I'd be very curious to hear how Sundance might differ from Tribeca or Doc NYC, Andrea, but generally speaking, when you submit your film, who are the first people on the selection hierarchy to see it, and how does it kind of make its way up through the chain?
Absolutely happy to talk about that. And it's so in general, for all the festivals that I've worked for, I can't speak to every festival out there, but all the ones that I've worked for and with, the process is extremely similar. The submissions first come to sort of a frontline group of frontline screeners, and the screeners are made up of people who generally apply. They have a deep interest in film. They may be film experts. They may be film professionals. They may have nothing to do with film, but are smart and interesting. To Deirdre's point earlier, there's great value in having a lot of different levels of experience, life experience, people with different careers, different interests, be the ones with eyes on everyone's film. There's great value to that. And so screeners and screening committees are generally made up of people from all walks of life. We like to keep them, a lot of diverse representation across the board, from life experience to where they're from, to careers, interests, etc., because they bring something different to the table. So the film will first make its way to the frontline screeners, and the film will always be seen by a minimum of at least 2 people, sometimes more, but it's never just one person looking at it. So sometimes that's a myth I hear out there. There's always more than one person. There's multiple eyes on the film, so it's never one person rejecting the film. It moves up with multiple eyes on it. And from there, the screener's job is to move up what they feel might be a good fit. And again, this is where my saying being a good fit is important than saying necessarily a great film, because you're looking at what is a really strong film, in addition to, will this be a good fit for this festival? Because festivals are different. They have different focuses, and some of them have particular missions. For instance, Sundance and Tribeca are very general, of course, but say I've also programmed for, say, the Athena Film Festival, and their mission is they need to be films that focus on strong examples of women's leadership, or strong example of women in power. So you're looking towards, and of course, Seattle Deaf, they're all about deaf stories. So you're looking for things that fit the mission and are also strong. So from there, they go up to generally a screening committee, and this is a smaller group of more of a curated group of individuals that maybe bring a higher level experience to the table. And these are people who watch the films that get passed up from the screeners. And the screening committees or programming committees will generally meet and discuss them, perhaps once a week, sometimes more than that. And it used to be in person, now it's mostly on Zoom. One positive thing that's happened in that regard is that because of Zoom screening committees now, you can have people from all over the place. Everybody doesn't have to be local. I see that as a good thing, a positive thing, because again, you can bring in more diversity to the screening committee. And the lead programmers or the more senior programmers are generally part of those meetings. And from there, you know, things get passed up to the senior programming and higher, who start to make evaluations based on input and judgment calls and lively debate. These meetings are the time when films are debated, discussed. Sometimes there's people don't feel the same way over a film. Everybody doesn't have to necessarily love a film, but sometimes the debate itself is what makes a film interesting, because you're thinking in terms of what will the audience experience be, and so forth. At the same time, I do want to mention that there's also a system of checks and balances in my experience, whereby the senior programmers aren't just sitting there waiting for the films to be pushed up to them. They're keeping an eye on everything. They're looking at when I'm directing the program of a certain festival, I will look at all the screeners' reviews, and perhaps a screener rejected something for some reason, but I will look at it, or a programmer will look at it and say, oh, I know that filmmaker's done interesting work. I'm gonna look at it anyway. So there are all these sort of points where a film can, just because it gets rejected or unliked by somebody on the front lines, doesn't mean it can't still go up, because there are all kinds of things going on to kind of push it forward.
So let me follow up a little bit with that. And Deirdre, this is for you as well, in your experience with Full Frame. You know, I mean, you're getting often thousands of submissions. You know, so how many frontline screeners are there? Are they just reviewing it, or is there a rating system that would propel it up? Do you, you know, are they just writing a review as like in longhand? I mean, is there some uniformity so that you have a way of kind of overseeing this? Is because they're dealing with so many films. Also, how many films are they seeing a day when they're, you know, in their role of submitting, of overseeing?
I mean, almost always that first rung committee, there's I've never worked on a festival where there wasn't a rating system, and I would include in that jurying. So, you know, jurying for cash awards. So you have the rating system, which makes things safe. The bottom line rule at Full Frame was every submission had to be watched by at least 2 separate people, fully, all the way through. And, you know, and I'm sure Andrea can say the same thing here, you're working, often you will find people that you stick with because you're like, I can trust this person. I know this person's doing the work. I know this person isn't sharing the work. That was something that we put in place at Full Frame, was you had to sign a paper if you were a reviewer, basically saying, I'm not going to share what I see or any of those other things. You have to take out, there are a couple of things, there's so much to talk about. You have to take out blind, you know, things you make a blind submission, where, for example, if somebody that is known to our community has made a film, we may put that in the pile as a blind submission, so you don't know who the filmmaker is, so it's not tipped one way or the other. And I think the other piece here is to remember that you're programming for a community. So this is where I think filmmakers forget, but I had the best film. It's like, maybe your film doesn't speak to North Carolina. Maybe your film doesn't, isn't going to be in that pile for a certain reason. So it's not just about being deaf or being in an ethnographic, film festival. It's about, we're serving different communities in a festival or at an art house that people forget about. So a mountaintop removal film may not mean much in, the middle of the country, where it would mean a great deal in the South. Consequently, that first round of programmers is probably watching 12 documentaries at least on mountaintop removal a year. So, and I'm not exaggerating.
She's not exaggerating.
I'm not exaggerating. So like there's certain issues that will come back again and again and again that first round of viewers is going to see. And a good half of them could raise to the next level for the actual submission committee. So the horsepower of a lead programmer like Andrea, like Sadie Tillery, like Sky Sidney is remarkable. And then eventually it will come to me as the executive director. So once things were, and that was just our way of doing it. There were certain films, again, that might have driven a great deal of discussion that they want my call on, that I will then watch. There could be, simply because I'm the main person having the dialogue with the donors or with sponsors, I'm watching those films once they're accepted or once they've been, deemed accepted. Doesn't mean they're going to play, right? Because we could go and say you're accepted and they're like, that's so nice, we're waiting for Tribeca. Like there's all of that mishigas that happens as well. But I do want to add that there's now, and we wanted this years ago, there's an ability for you, if you're on Film Freeway, to see which festivals belong to the Film Festival Alliance, which does have a code of conduct and does have best practices in place, so that you're not just like flinging your film into the air. But yeah, there's over, I mean, the last count I remember at Full Frame was about 1,300 submissions for a 4-day festival. And we haven't even gotten into what's in competition versus what's not in competition.
Right. Or what's a world premiere versus with Full Frame, you can take films from other festivals as well, like Sundance.
Yeah, well, exactly. Or for example, that great film that's coming in, but it's going to air in 2 weeks. So why would we give that slot to a film that's about to be on television when we could give that slot to a brand new film that might need the lift of that set of laurels?
So, Andrea, I want to get back to you on this because we didn't really get to the answer. Like, how many films are these frontline programmers watching a day? And when they are rating it, is there like a certain ratings number that totals up that makes it up to the next level?
Right. Well, there in every festival I've worked with, there is a very organized system for how the everyone rates a film. There is a system. There's a numeric value, and they also write up comments about it. And when I'm leading screening committees, which I'm doing now, what I want from people on screeners and so forth is I advise them I want you to be able to articulate what's working and what's not working for you, why you think this film would be a good fit or not. Being able to articulate the reasons is what's important, succinctly, right? Being able, and that's where you're sort of born. You can hone your skills to do that, where everyone can watch a film and say, oh, I didn't like that, I hated that, or I loved it. I need you to be able to say why, what worked for it. And also, to Deirdre's point, why will it work for this community, for this festival, will it play well here at this festival, and be able to articulate that. Now, that said, it doesn't all calculate. There's not an equation there's not a formula or an equation that like pushes films up. It's never like that. That's more of just sort of a guideline to kind of know where people stand. It's always going with, in my experience, going with a gut feeling about a process, discussion, meaning programmers are not looking at, oh, this film made an average of, on a scale from 1 to 10, it averaged a 7. Therefore, it's going to be programmed. It definitely doesn't work like that. That just means, okay, most people are liking this film. That's interesting. Let's discuss that. And the decisions are always made from the discussion, there's so many factors going on, right? Well, like Deirdre said, when is it going to be on HBO in a week? Is it going to air on PBS? What does it matter? Is it a particularly timely topic? Is it something that will particularly speak to the community? There's so many things that factor into it to make those decisions. So it's never a formula that says, oh, they magically move up. It's always it's judgment. It's the experience, the judgment of really being connected to what is going to work for that particular festival.
And so part of your role is when it comes up to you, you're looking at that point to balance out the programming to, do you, for instance, would you not want to have too many personal docs for some reason? Is there a certain kind of subject matter that we can only have one film on Ukraine this year?
I would say no on that. In fact, as subjective as film programming is, and it's so important to remember that there is no equation. I'm so glad you said that, Andrea, because we do use numbers and we do use math, but there's no equation, and every programmer has their own personal biases, no matter how experienced they are, right? But what you'll see are themes. You will definitely see themes emerge every year. And sometimes we'll even know, 2 years ahead of time when Ukraine was invaded, we were like, okay, we got about 2 years for those films to start showing up. So that's going to happen. And you want it to happen because the community is hungry for that information. Where the documentary filmmaker fills in for journalism, we're hungry for that in the audience and for discussion. So, I mean, where you lead films that year, it was almost a theme, which is part of why we chose you for opening night, right? So it's this broadly popular film. It's somebody on our advisory board. It's just perfect for opening night, which means you had to be out of competition, right? Because again, we didn't even get into what's in competition, what's out of competition. But there's definitely themes that emerge, and that's almost like the zeitgeist. That has nothing to do with programming. That's just the world.
So how do you make those decisions about what's in competition or not?
Well, at Full Frame, that had a lot to do, and again, that was completely Sadie's call. It would have to do with, for example, has it shown a lot already? Has it been out in the world? Does it have any ties personally to our community, which would give it an unfair advantage? So that's like an overt issue. And then if you want to spotlight that film, so if it's more than, the standing Q&A and we want to have a panel discussion around it, it has to come out of competition as well, because it would skew the voting, right? If we're having a longer conversation around it, if it's in the opening night slot, the closing night slot, et cetera. So you definitely want to pull those films out and make them out of competition. And then that was also what Sunday was for, of course, because if the film is in competition, that all of that is happening beforehand. So people need able to see the film. That's just like a very tiny brush stroke. Sure. Andrea, I can speak more.
Yes, and I can add too that yes, there's I always say the films will guide the programming, not the other way around. For instance, we don't at festivals go in saying, this year, before we open submissions, we are going to do a theme about this. To me, that's a bad idea. Instead, like Deirdre said, we wait and see what's coming in, what kind of themes are emerging, and they emerge organically. They emerge organically, and you notice them, and that determines the best strands, the best thematic elements to the program, because you're seeing that, oh, everybody is really feeling this right now, or we are getting all these amazing personal films. I love wonderful personal films, or we're getting a bunch of films about, a particular topic, and that will help guide the program. So it's a very organic process, and I think that that works best. And at the same time, programming, is always about great storytelling. Say you're getting 100 films about Ukraine, which we do, and mountaintop mining, so forth. Those are just recurring themes, and that's okay. And obviously you can't program 100 of them, but what programmers are looking for, what we're looking for is one thing that's very important when we evaluate films is storytelling, and having a really, we look at what the lens is. If we say we're looking for unique points of view on stories, for instance, if we get a whole bunch of stories about Ukraine, which we do, what stories are presenting a truly unique lens on this? What is presenting something that we haven't seen before? Those are going to be the ones that sort of move to the top. Is what is the story saying that's new, that's different, that's unique?
And I just want to add to that. This is where, as filmmakers, I'm sure you realize the film has to be excellent to even be in consideration, right? So you have thousands, then you have so many on the same topic. But I agree with Andrea. I'm always looking for who's breaking the mold, who's telling the story in a new way, who's giving me a new angle. And it's not an accident that some of our greatest filmmakers do that over and over again, right? And that's why they're repeated. Now, I will say, for those of you that are not familiar with Full Frame or other festivals that do it, we do have a thematic strand. And that thematic strand is programmed, it's out of competition, but it's programmed by another filmmaker or by a documentary professional. So this past year, they had Yancey Ford, for example. And I think it's important to note that's a way for the festival to look at something either thematically or formally, which is what I love about Full Frame, is that they're looking at the formal way a documentary can be put together. So they're looking at those things through that lens as well. I just want to add one other thing about programming, which is venue size, or which venue you're in. You need to trust your programmer. A programmer knows if your film's going to play well in the 1,000-seat house, or if your film's going to play well in the smaller house. And I cannot tell you how many times I know I want to be in Fletcher Hall. I want to be in Fletcher Hall. It's like, we actually know our audience, and we know our venue, and we know where you're going to play best. No festival programmer worth their salt, and I will add, worth their salt, is going to program you in a venue that doesn't work for your film. When you get into the bigger festivals, that can happen because they're so gigantic and they have so much programming. Maybe you get lost in the shuffle, but that's generally in a more market-driven festival and not in the independent festivals that are not sales-driven festivals. So I just want you to keep that in mind, that if you're at a True False, a Camden, DC Docs, those are experienced programmers that are going to do the best for your film and put you where you're supposed to be. So I just have to give that plug for that.
And I definitely agree with that.
So, Andrea, how much consideration do you give to, what you think will play best? You work for, bigger festivals like Tribeca and Sundance, which appeal to a wide general audience of doc, well, in Sundance it's mixed, not just a doc festival. But, do you lean towards certain films that you like, celebrity-driven films that will obviously they must be good, but to want to pick a certain amount of films that because you think you'll bring in audiences?
Well, I also wanted to make sure I make it clear that, I also, it's very helpful for me as a programmer because, I came up working through AFI Fest and Silver Docs and AFI Docs, and now being on the programming committee, being involved in the programming with DC Docs. So as well as these very small niche things like Seattle Deaf and Gallaudet, so forth. Those all, I mention that because you become aware of exactly that, sort of what's going to work for the audiences, what kind of venue, how many people, and so forth. And DC Docs lost one of its big venues, when our E Street cinemas closed at the last minute, but it's being redirected and got new cinemas. But you're always thinking in terms of okay, you never let that dictate the choices of the film. You're thinking, once I have my selection, where will it play best? Like Deirdre said, for instance, we know maybe there's a fantastic, and there's so many wonderful small personal films that maybe are not going to pack a huge house, but it's a wonderful film. You want it to be seen, and you're trying to create a good experience for the filmmaker, because that's very much a part of the process, which is, how can I help the filmmaker have the best experience possible, which means a full house, right? And maybe packing a full house in a smaller theater is better than is obviously better than a half empty large theater, right? So you definitely think about venues after the program is set. You don't let the venue dictate, like, oh, I've got a small venue to fill, let's find a small film. It's never that way. You pick your program first, a strong program, and then figure out what belongs where. Now, not just the bigger, you asked about celebrity driven films and so forth. It's obvious that some of the bigger festivals programs and things that are celebrity driven, and I think that does fill seats. Now that is something for the those decisions are for the top of the heap, the festival directors there. So that's not something I'm deciding at the bigger festivals, but it certainly helps to draw audiences for the festival, and that's true of any festival. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to strong story. And one thing I love about programming documentaries is that I love that, say, somebody who isn't a well-known person but is the main participant in a film, they're the most interesting people in the world, and to have them as a guest there, treat them like celebrity, that's exciting. Those are the people I want to see, and documentary audiences love to see, and they're the most interesting people in the world after you've seen their fabulous, fascinating stories, I think. And I think there's room for everything.
I just want to give a quick shout out to Gene McLaughlin, who I noticed is here, who's been running the Sebastopol Documentary Film Festival for many, many years. Great, great festival. So good to see you, Gene. And weigh in, by the way, if you feel it's appropriate. One quick question before I get on to another aspect, which is, I've always been curious about the audience awards, because some films get huge audiences and other films are programmed during the day, during the week, and have a relatively small audience. How do you balance that out? Is it just done purely on percentages of the ratings, or what goes into that, Deirdre?
For me, it's the greatest part of being part of a great university. We had this brain from Duke who had this very complicated mathematical system that would figure out, based on house size and all the things that came in, what the vote was. I think once there was a 0.01 difference between one and the other, and that particular film that was over by 0.01 had done some things that we would not consider ethical for the audience award. And so it skewed the other way on a decision. That is the only time I remember having to approve such a decision. It's completely math. Now, how other festivals do it, I don't know, but I was just so grateful for this woman at Duke who did all that work. You do, I mean, in the old days, you know, and I don't know if they still do it by paper, but you know, you're collecting all these papers and you're up till 2 a.m. the night before. I remember David Wilson, the year he had a film, who is the former director of True False, standing around us at like 1:30 in the morning. And he's like, I know this moment. I know what you're doing. And I'm like, it's nice, David, step away. Like, yes, that's exactly what we're doing. Please walk away. But yeah, it's thrilling. I'm sorry, I get so excited because I used to announce the audience award and it was just so much fun. But I think it also goes back to what Andrea was saying, which is that people that go to documentary only festivals are great audiences, and they really don't care if you're a movie star. They really don't. They're just digging the films and they trust the programmers, and they're coming whether it's 10 a.m. to hear that person or, you know, late at night. And Doug, you know, we would show things in the thematic band that would pack a big house at 10 o'clock because it was a film you weren't going to get to see anywhere else, that we had gotten a 35 print of or whatever. So anyway, but for the audience award, it's strictly mathematical, almost strictly mathematical, and it's a lot of work.
I know for a fact that programmers love to discover new filmmakers and new films. I was a producer of this film, Resurrect Dead, The Mystery of the Toynbee Tiles, that was submitted by a first-time filmmaker to Sundance, like with an hour to go overnight, and he got in, and not only got in, he won the directing prize. And the Sundance programmers couldn't have been prouder of that fact. So I would love you both to dispel the myth that you need to know somebody, sales agent helps, or having some big name come on. And how do you fend off pressure put on you by sales agents or the like? Or do they have some sort of impact?
I will answer. I'm just going to say very quickly, I'm sorry, Andrea, that that was my role. So in other words, to keep Sadie away from that was a very large part of my role. So whether it was somebody like you, Doug, who was on our advisory board, who's a filmmaker, you know, and there were many big names on that list with you that were both producers and well-known filmmakers, that's my job. And I was really proud of that at Full Frame, to keep the money separate from the programming, to allow people to know we're not pay to play. We're not pay to play. We never were, and we could be. And people knew that about our integrity. So I think that's super, super important. But I also want to just say, one of my memories, again, it was Sadie was in her office, I was in my office. I come out and I see this very tall African-American man walking away, and Sadie's got these DVDs in her hands. I'm like, who is that? She's like, I'm from Rhode Island, for the last day of submissions to get his film in before the end of submissions. And that was Ramel Ross. And look where he is now. And, you know, and I think we were one of the first people to show Hale County Good Morning This Evening, and it won our grand jury award. I mean, that's the kind of film that would win a grand jury award only at Full Frame. So, you know, we're super proud of that. We were super proud of Pete Nix's film. Like, there's a ton of those stories I could tell, and all programmers could tell, because you know, you're not necessarily looking for the diamond in the rough, but man, when you find one, it's just so cool. It's awesome.
Yes, and I definitely agree with that. And you know, Full Frame is so great. I've been to Full Frame many, many times, and it's always a joy to be at Full Frame. They do things wonderfully there. And but yes, I think that Resurrect Dead, you know, I love that film. We showed it at Silver Docs when it was still Silver Docs, and I did one of their Q&As, and everybody still remembers that film because it was so unique and interesting. And I actually came across a Toynbee tile like last year in New York,
I
and
did last week,
everybody gets so
Andrea.
exciting.
Last week, crossing 4th Avenue at 12th Street in Manhattan. There it
I
was in the
love it.
middle of the road.
I love it. Mine was up towards Radio City, but people are still talking about that film. And but anyway, yes, programmers love to find new gems, new filmmakers. It's a joy. You know, sometimes I think that uh sometimes there are people out there that think that programmers are watching the film and going like, ha ha ha, I can't wait to reject this and assert my domination over the process. And it's like it's so not like that. We want to love your film. We want we want to find the wonderful gem, and part of the joy of working as a programmer is to have just a teeny tiny part and helping to get the film out into the world and to be seen and have more eyes on it. It's a joy to do that and to connect with filmmakers and help them connect with each other with the work. So we're always looking for the hidden gems, and it's a wonderful treat when that happens. It's a joy. So it's most definitely not who, you know, everybody wants to discover a gem. Absolutely. Which is why everything gets watched multiple times all the way through is the courtesy to the filmmakers. That's the rule for our screening committee and programmers and frontline screeners, is to give everything a shot.
We'll be going to questions from you guys in a few minutes. So if you want to start using the raised hand function to line up to ask your questions, now is the time. So having, say, you know, Brad Pitt as my executive producer and calling you up and, since that doesn't work, what would work? What would help? What should filmmakers know when submitting? Is there anything that they can do, maybe not to lobby you, but to kind of get the film on your radar, or should they just simply submit and trust the process?
I'll just jump in and say it's fine to trust the process. There's nothing wrong with reaching out via email. I would say don't call, I'd say email. There's nothing wrong with reaching out and say, hey, I have this film, I submitted, here's a brief description of it. I hope you enjoy it. That, you know, there's nothing wrong with that, to kind of like land a little bit more on the radar. Also, I would recommend going to as many festivals as you're able to go to, even if you don't have a film in it, and, you know, network, meet, get to know, develop relationships as much as possible. That won't get your film in, of course, but it can't hurt to know each other, right? And to create, to become more part of a community and to know. But there's nothing wrong with reaching out and saying, hey, I've submitted this film, just so you know. I would just caution on, don't be annoying, don't do it over and over, don't harass. There's a difference.
Right. Deirdre, do you have anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the same. It does not hurt to have somebody like you call me and say, hey, you know, I know this kid, first time filmmaker, would you just take an extra look? Yeah, that goes in the programmer's ear. It won't be the over under, but it doesn't hurt. As I said, we didn't pay to play. I think it's really bad if you hound us. That's not helpful, because I'm just gonna say it. When I was at Full Frame, I had a rule: no assholes. I'm sorry. If you're an asshole, you can't be with us. We are too small. We were too lean, and it ruins the experience for everybody else. So nobody was better than the other. And that can be, you know, everybody from a multi-Oscar winner to, you know, a first-time filmmaker. And I think that's what made us special. So for me, be a good guest. You know, and you know, it's not like programmers don't speak to one another or festival directors don't speak to one another. So reputation precedes you. Be a good guest like you would anywhere. I will say that when you brought up sales agents, you know, those days are going away. So, you know, if it's not a market-driven festival, that's not what you're there for, I hope, because that's not happening anymore.
I have still a lot more questions, but we have a whole boatload of questions, so I'm going to go right to them. Normally, I would just start with the first hand up, but Jean, I noticed that you're in line here, so I just wanted to get to you first. If you had anything to add besides whatever question or you might be saying.
I thank you. I did want to add to this conversation in particular. Send in your very best, cleanest, sharpest, most compelling photos for us to be able to use in further marketing. Make your synopsis short, to the point, and also compelling. Say who you are. Don't give us a long treatise to take in your information, because it often translates to how your film will feel. That's how we take in those kinds of entries. And yes, it does help to follow up with a nice letter, also with some interest and showing some knowledge of what our niche is in the market. Do your homework, decide if we are the best fit, if you have the best chance, knowing who our audience is and what our mission is. And we just really appreciate that level of attention from filmmakers. That's all I want to say.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jean. Christine.
Yeah, first, I just want to give so much appreciation for this session and really for everyone who's involved in film festivals for what you do. They are such an important place for ideas to happen, especially now. Anyway, I know that I'm planning to submit to Sundance this year, and I'm curious about, I know the guidelines are that you don't have to have a finished film, but if you don't have a finished film, and I know people who have, successfully done that, what are the things to really make sure you hit home with, if it's wherever it is in between rough cut and final, and what are the things not to stress about? Also, I'm wondering about the role, how important a celebrity, a name narrator is to the submission, or if it can be, we're talking with so-and-so, if it's not locked in.
Sure, I can speak to this. So thank you for your question. It's very common for films to be submitted to festivals, including Sundance and Tribeca, that are not completed in rough cut stage and fine cut stage and so forth. That's not uncommon. And that's okay. My suggestion is make that very clear on the submission. Maybe create some text before the film rolls, saying this is where the film is. We're in a fine cut stage, we're in a rough cut stage, we're missing this, we're waiting on this, to create sort of a vision in the programmer's head of what you see the final film being like, and that's okay. My suggestion is get it as close as you possibly can before you submit it. You definitely don't want to send something that is just not even close to being done. It should be pretty close to being done. Otherwise, you're kind of probably not, you're doing a disservice to your film and yourself, because resubmitting a film doesn't always end up better down the line. So make sure when you submit the first time, it's as close as possible. Just make it clear what's missing. And as far as a celebrity narrator, narration in general, like for, say, I call it, the third person voice of God narrator, doesn't generally do well in film submissions for documentary festivals. That's not always true, but mostly because it tends to have a little bit of a PBS feel, television feel. And that's a very common feedback for documentary feature submissions, if something feels PBS-y or TV-like, they're looking for cinematic documentaries. And that's not to say sometimes a narrated film will get through, it will. But in general, that's a common feedback. If there is a celebrity attached to it, that will probably make a bigger impression on, say, a Sundance or a Tribeca for that. So you want to mention it. That will certainly get it noticed and considered. But my suggestion is when it comes to using, voice of God narration, make sure that it really enhances the film, is my suggestion.
Just producer, I see there's so many hands. Wait, Sundance is every year.
Yep.
It's every year. Wait till you have the closest cut possible. Just wait.
Is it important, by the way, if you have to let you know that the participants, the main subject of your film, will be there in person? If that makes any difference in terms of consideration?
Ahead of time, no, that's not going to make any difference because a film is going to get selected on its own merits anyway. And, so saying that ahead of time is not going to make any difference, in my opinion.
Good. Dana.
Hi, thank you so much. First of all, I'm so grateful for the conversation. Thank you for hosting these incredible humans. I have a film called Rescued Hearts about the healing power of horses that has built an incredible following on social media. Like last month, 5,000 hits on our website. We do have a Canadian celebrity in it. And we have started submitting to film festivals and have, this is our second full feature film, and we could really use the support of getting out into the world. My question is, when a friend of ours who's a screener for a film festival heard the length of our film, she was like, oh, you're not going to do well with an hour, 58-minute cut of your film. It's going to be super hard to program. I think you're going to get passed over even though you have a phenomenal film. And that was really disheartening. So thankfully, Illuminate Film Festival in Santa Barbara, we're going to have our world premiere there on May 2nd, but I'm in the process currently of submitting to film festivals. We have a compelling, beautiful, beautiful stories, incredible film. I know I'm biased, but I'm curious your thoughts. Are we, I don't know what they say, shooting ourselves in the foot by having a film that is too long for festivals?
Well, I can speak to this and then Deirdre can jump in if she likes. I'm glad first of all, congratulations on Santa Barbara. That's wonderful. Great for you. And I'm glad you brought up the topic of runtime. It is something that is an issue. And I'll just kind of give you a broad overview of that, which is there's no hard and fast rule about runtimes, but I will say that generally speaking, a film that is nearly 2 hours is gonna have a harder time getting in. Now I haven't seen your film. It may be the most wonderful film in the world, and therefore it won't matter. And there are plenty of films that are long like that do get into festivals. I'm speaking very generally. That tends to be a detriment, and in my experience, films that are that long almost always could be tighter. So, and I haven't seen the film, so I'm making no judgment on your particular film. It could be perfect as is. So that said, but I would advise everyone to be brutal in the editing room and have people looking at it in the editing room who are not emotionally attached to you, because that is the hardest thing to do, is to be brutal in the editing room and to be willing to tighten and cut. In my experience, most films that long don't need to be that long. So I would suggest just be, brutal and tight, and have people look at it who don't have any emotional investment in it, who can be really super duper objective and think in terms of the programmer. And on the other end of the spectrum, I'll also mention that films that are 60 minutes and under, sometimes features are defined as 40 minutes and over, but I see a lot of feedback that films that are 60 minutes tend not to get in either. It's because they tend to be cut for television, and you can feel it. It's an instinct, it's a vibe you get watching it. It feels like it was cut for television, and it feels like it should be airing on television, and that's okay if it's for television. It's about knowing what the right home is for your particular film. It's figuring out what's going to be the best fit for your film. Maybe it is going to be broadcast, maybe it is going to be public television, and that's okay. But the sweet spot for programming a feature is somewhere between, I'd say, you know, about between 70 and 90 minutes is a good sweet spot for getting the most programming in
Andrea,
general.
that brings up the question of shorts, which we haven't touched on. Is there an ideal length for shorts, and also like a length that is beyond which you're going to probably program it?
It depends on the festival, and that's why a festival will have a guideline of what it considers a short. Some have exactly what Andrea was saying as a positive. They have a mid-length film section, which would be that 1 hour thing. It's not what I like. I agree with Andrea. You need a senior editor, which is expensive to get in there, because great film is poetry. It's not prose. It's not. And 2 hours would tell me the same thing. Now, does that mean Scorsese can make a 3 hour film that's brilliant? Yes, he can also make a 3 hour film that's not brilliant. So my question to you is, how do you intend to sell the film? And what I'm really looking at there, and this is an entirely other conversation, is festival strategy and strategy on distribution. 2 hours is very difficult to do anything with. We need to fill our theater and move on to another cinema, right? We need to get the audience in and out on a rail at a festival. We can't be late. So 2 hours is going to create a problem in what we call the grid and how we build it for that day. It's not impossible, but every frame better be bled over. And I would probably side with what Andrea is saying, which is, when I look at that, I'd say it could probably be tighter. Quite frankly, almost every documentary can be tighter, especially at the festival stage. And it's going to get that way if it does end up either streamed, televised, or in a theater. But the real question is, what are you going to do with that thing? Because 2 hours is just a very hard sell.
But let me get back to shorts for a second, though. Is there, because it comes up a lot on the D word, is there, like I said, an ideal length for it, or a length that is too long to, make it more unlikely to program at a festival?
I'll speak to this real quickly. Great question about that. Shorts are typically defined as anything, and generally defined as, say, up to 40 minutes. Thinking, and I'm speaking strictly from an in-person festival programming point of view here. It doesn't mean there's not a home for many different kinds of shorts of varying runtime. But for an in-person festival, it's very difficult to program long shorts. And thinking of it from a programmer's point of view, shorts tend to be put together in a shorts program, which tend to total about 90 minutes. So if everybody submits a 30-minute film or a 40-minute film, you could, now I did that one time in my life, and I've been doing this for like 20 years. I programmed one program for Silver Ducks of 3 30-minute shorts. It was extremely rare, but they were all very strong, and it worked that particular time. So the longer it is, the less likely it's going to be programmed. Now, that's not always true, but a sweet spot would be somewhere between 7 and 15 minutes generally. Again, what I tend to notice, the longer a short is, from 30 to 40 minutes, it can be tighter. It's tighten, 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 edit, edit, edit. Occasionally sometimes it feels like somebody submitting, say, a 39-minute short, which happens a lot, is somebody who really wants to make a feature. And you have to know, do I want to make a short, or do I want to make a feature? And if the answer is a short, keep it short. Somewhere between 7 and 15 minutes is a good rule of thumb, but sometimes there are brilliant shorts out there that are 20, 30 minutes, but just know that it's not going to help the longer it is. Just be as tight and brutal in the editing room as possible.
it won't help for festivals, but for Academy consideration, actually, it does help to be longer. So you're navigating both things there. More questions. So sorry, folks. Let's also try and be really brief with the questions because we have, it looks like over a dozen, and our time is getting limited. So Michael?
Uh, Thanks for enlightening us, but I just wonder one thing. You said you had 1,300 submissions, and sounds like you turned down most of the people. Could you think of alternative ways of filmmakers sharing their work, films like mine that don't reach the level that some of the competitors that you've accepted? Is there any other alternatives, or is basically film festivals the thing? And if so, I don't think many of us originally, when we get into making films, think of making films for film festivals. Anyway, any thoughts about that? Thanks.
Really quickly, I think if you're making the film, you do want to know who you're making it for. Nowadays, you have Kimina, you have Picture Motion, you have these different elements gather. Angel Studios, which is a Christian-based studio, has done this to the best effect, which is to self-distribute, but in other venues. And I'll give you a great example. There are filmmakers here in Minnesota who I adore, and their very first film was called Blood Stripe, which is a Marine term for the line that runs down your leg. It was about a female soldier coming back with PTSD. It's a gorgeous film. It won at the Los Angeles Film Festival, but it was an hour and they weren't quite sure what to do with it. But they knew as filmmakers, they didn't care about money, unusual. They wanted to get it on bases. And so they went through Picture Motion, which almost always does documentaries, even though it was a narrative film. And they got that film in front of women vets. And that's what they wanted to do. And it was really successful, and it engaged those women and gave them a place to have a conversation about some really hard issues. And I was thrilled to give them over to those women at Picture Motion and now at Kimina, which allows you to screen and film deserts. We didn't talk about working with a local art house, which can be difficult, but doable, where you can screen your films in your local cinemas. Gary Hustwit is the father of self-distribution, has been doing it for years before he made Eno. So yeah, there are a lot of different elements on how to do that. It would probably be better for another face-to-face instead of going the festival route. There are other ways to do this.
We will come back to you, Deirdre, for that. Be warned. Simon, you're up.
Thanks. Yeah, again, thanks for all the tips. I'm interested to know, Andrea and Deirdre, do you have any tips for first-time filmmakers, a person who's entering their first film, so they'll be doing the festival circuit for the first time? Any tips at all for somebody in that position? Thank you.
I would say it's all about the story. It's just about telling a great story. Make sure you have a great story. Make sure you have a unique point of view, something that makes it stand out, and most importantly, don't get too caught up in saying, oh, it has to be Sundance, it has to be Tribeca, something like that. Find the right home for that story. There are so many wonderful festivals and sometimes and really terrific festivals out there, and figure out, get a list of the ones that are going to be the best fit for that story, and don't necessarily get caught up in it has to be this one or that one. Find the best fit.
Yeah, I'd reiterate that. I noticed online, I'll get to you, Nick, I'm a producer of Nick's film, My Omaha. Beautiful film. It just premiered at Sundance, and it was like the perfect festival for that film. I think it might have gotten lost at a Sundance as much as we wanted to be there. But Sundance had just moved to LA, and there was a lot of energy around it. It separated from Sundance, and so you're absolutely right. There are so many other festivals that could be right, and we are all obsessed with Sundance naturally because it seems like they're the ones that get all the attention for the year. Um, Antoine, welcome back. Good to see you.
Hi, good to see you again. Thank you, Deirdre and Andrea, for all the very interesting feedback and information you gave us. I want to jump in concerning after festivals and something you touched upon, Deirdre, just a few minutes ago. Do you keep in touch with the filmmakers to see what happens after they went through the festival, to see if they were able to get some kind of distribution, or they were going to go to another festival to see what kind of life they would have afterwards?
Well, we often know where you're going afterward because that's our job, because we need to, move the film, and et cetera. I would say that in general, the programmers I've worked with are passive in that respect. They're waiting to hear back from you. But I would also lie if I didn't tell you, I've been reading the trades every morning since I was an assistant in Los Angeles. So I'm tracking things all the time. And I know distributors are tracking where things go. They're not just looking at laurels, they're tracking films very, very narrowly. Very well-known documentary filmmaker who I'm speaking with about her film right now. When I was in my meeting in London last week, Dogwolf knew of the film but hadn't seen the deck yet. She doesn't even know how they were tracking it, and she's not even in production yet. So yeah, people generally are tracking those things if they're in the business, but not. I can't say that for every festival or for every programmer. Andrea?
Yes, I agree. We're tracking programmers in general, generally speaking, are always tracking films that are appropriate to that festival, and will sometimes track for years. Sometimes it begins with somebody says, maybe you hear something from somebody, you wonder how things get on the radar. Maybe you simply somebody tells you about it, or the filmmaker tells you about it. Oh, I'm going to start working on this. Boom, you make a note, you start tracking it. Or you see a list of, oh, Chicken and Egg or this or that has funded a group of things, or seed money for this or that. You start tracking it. You may be tracking something for years, but projects that are interesting, programmers are on it, they're watching, they're tracking.
Gabe, can you come on camera? And unmute. There you go.
Hi. Yeah, this is great. Thank you, guys. I'm a few days away from submitting a feature doc to its first festival, and it's a very personal story, issues of homelessness, substance use disorder. I'm wondering if there's a way to find out, like, which festivals are out there that are best for that type of story. Like, is there a way to search by issue, or just a list of doc festivals like personal stories kind of thing?
Yeah.
Well, Film Freeway, but yeah, you want to really do your homework before you submit. I mean, that sounds like a shoe-in for Camden to me, because they have a pharmaceutical that actually gives them money, that talks about drug abuse, etc. They're looking at those films narrowly. But again, I think you really doing your homework, talking to other filmmakers, get on their websites, like, here are the festivals I've read on Film Freeway that are interesting. Now I'm going to get on their website and do that research. But to me, Film Freeway is the very first place to start.
And I would just advise everyone to build on that too. The festivals that you're interested in, or you think you might be a good fit for, track what they're actually programming, watch what they're programming. A lot of the festival websites have archives of festivals past, and you can go through them and just kind of get a sense of what sorts of things they program. That doesn't necessarily predict the future, but you can at least get a sense of a personality, especially if you haven't been there before.
I would also, if you trust the story, I mean, Sundance, Tribeca, Full Frame, all these great festivals are just looking for great stories. So they're not doing it around the subject. I mean, homelessness, addiction, that could play anywhere if the story is compelling enough. So, trust that you have a film that will work.
But there's also a look to certain festivals. There's also a, right? Like, True False has a certain thematic feel. Full Frame has a certain thematic feel. If I see a film with a lot of negative space, I might be like, oh, you know, like there's certain looks that come up thematically, but you just have to do your homework.
Yep. Mary, you're up.
Okay, I think this last one partially answered it. So, but if there's, my first question was about the research, like what you recommend doing, because we spent hours researching probably about 250 to 300 festivals that we could find that we thought were a good fit, and we still don't get in. So, I mean, maybe our movie was just terrible. And then I guess conversely, like, is there a way to read the rejection letters? Like, to tell if it was like, oh, you were close, but we just couldn't fit in the programming, or this movie is terrible, stop your work as a filmmaker, or like what? I'm just trying to like research my next film. And I feel like, I mean, you should see my spreadsheets of festival research, and I've done the whole thing, looked through all past programs, and I thought I had it, but is there something I'm missing?
I don't know where Andrea went, because this is really her bailiwick. I would say after 250 to 300 rejections, good on you for still standing.
Oh, no. That many research, we didn't have that kind of money to
Oh,
submit.
thank God.
That much research.
Oh my God.
Oh gosh, no.
That's just awful. We never sent specific feedback. True False always sent specific feedback. And again, all these festivals have new directors now, and I don't know how they do it. I know Full Frame still doesn't, and that's for good reason, which is because there's no way to tell you, in our opinion, that your baby's ugly. And it's not because your baby's ugly. It's very often exactly what they said, which is we don't have room for all of them. You know, it's literally that. So try again. But it's also, it's a matter of, again, very specific research. And I'm hearing this theme again and again. There should be a producer on the team that is a festival consultant who really knows the field widely and can say, well, I think we try here, here, and here, and in what order? That too, right? But I will go back to the Sundance piece, which is get your film as tight and as good as possible, because guess what? The merry-go-round comes around every year. It doesn't go anywhere unless you have a time issue film, you know, which is about an election coming up. That's a different story. Andrea, I'm so glad you're back, because did you hear her question?
You're muted.
Now you're muted.
I had a freezing issue and I did not hear the initial question.
Okay. Are you, Deirdre and Andrea, are you both able to go a little bit over the 1:30 cutoff time?
I can for a little bit, yes.
You okay with that, Deirdre? Okay, because we have 8 questions. We're going to cut the questions off at those 8. So again, try and be succinct. And Joanne.
Yeah, hi, thank you very much for this. It's very educational and enlightening. My question is, why do so many festivals say they won't accept anything that's older than 2 years? My film premiered in 22. I think it's still relevant in 25, but there's so many festivals I don't submit to because they won't accept anything that's quote unquote old.
Yeah, it's not that it isn't relevant. It's that, you know, those are the rules that certain festivals have. And in some way, it's that we feel if your film's been out there already, you've already had a chance. You've been, you know, you've gone through the festival circuit. And so we're looking to the next group. And I don't care if you're Barbara Koppel, who I adore. If that film's 2 years old, we're going to move on to somebody else. Andrea, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. The same thing. When you think about it from, sometimes when you're thinking about questions like that, it's do your best to kind of put yourself in the shoes of the programmers or the festival organizers, which is they are trying to find films that are going to attract an in-person audience to come to the theater. And if a film is already circulated out there, it's too available, it's overly available, too many people have seen it, that's going to lessen the impact that it might have for that particular festival. You're trying to create an impact with each film that you program. You want there to be like a stimulating conversation, a stimulating Q&A. It doesn't mean that your issue isn't relevant. It just means they're looking for things that are fresh, new, that maybe haven't been around as much. Some festivals like Sundance or Tribeca are looking for premieres, things that haven't been anywhere, but other festivals are still looking for things that are relatively new. For that very reason, it's to keep the conversation fresh and the audience fresh is sort of my take on it.
Okay. Alex.
Hi there, this is lovely, enlightening, etc. My question is, from your perspective, what are metrics of success or like feelings or things that happen during the festival for you that you are just jazzed about something being programmed? And then kind of related, what can a filmmaker do that's invited to be a good guest or like make you feel like we did that, we're good, excited?
I love you. Can you come live with me? That's
I'm available.
so sweet. Andrea.
Sure. And feel free to jump in with anything, Deirdre. It's, you know, we're looking to have just a full house, a stimulating conversation, an audience that, and a filmmaker. We want the experience to be, you know, a really positive one for the filmmaking team as well as for the audience, right? It's a dialogue. And I think that's what we're looking for, is just a really stimulating dialogue. And it doesn't have to be necessarily leave the audience feeling good per se, but feeling something. And whether it be motivated to take action, just motivated, emotional, engaged, that sort of thing. And to be a good guest, as Deirdre noted, you know, simply, we're thrilled to have you. Definitely, it's okay to want all the good things for your film, but as Deirdre mentioned earlier, understand that when your film is programmed in a certain theater or at a certain time of day or night, there's a reason behind it. There's a logic behind it. It isn't willy-nilly. And it's very common for filmmakers to come and say, I want, like Deirdre said, I want Fletcher Hall. I want the big hall. I want the primo time. I want the 8 o'clock spot at Fletcher Hall and da da da. And that's only natural, but understand that there's a lot of logic and thinking through of how, and a lot of experience behind how a festival has been designed. So trust the process, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I think I'm looking for joy, quite simply. I wish I could convey how much the people I have worked with and I love taking care of film and filmmakers. And that means how we project your work, how it's heard, how the, you know, all of that. And you need to do your homework, because there are some very well-known and big name festivals that treat people like crap, quite frankly. And I've been on juries at some of those festivals and treated like crap, whether it's housing or whether it's, you know, whatever it is. And I've heard that from, you know, all the way from big filmmakers, all the way down to first filmmakers. So do your homework. But being a good guest, it doesn't mean also being a wallflower. There are certain things you need to ask for that are appropriate as a filmmaker, and a better festival will listen to those things and take care of them. So there is some give and take there. Partnering with somebody like Doug, like Nick did, is a great idea, because you have this experienced producer who is a filmmaker who can help guide you through that process. I recently was working on something and we had a screening at MoMA, and the filmmaker was objecting to this and that. And I was like, you're a part of his programming. We're a guest. Behave like a guest, right? That's important for that filmmaker to hear from me, because I've run a festival, because I'm like, there are certain things it's appropriate for you to ask for, and there are certain things where it's like, we are part of your show and we're going to be a good guest. So thank you for asking that. But I think all of us in the festival world, we're just looking for joy from the audience, from the filmmaker, from the crew we're working with. It's the best thing in the world. I would cry like a baby at every awards barbecue because I'm half because I was exhausted and half because I'm just so happy after a year to see that happen.
It also must be so hard to, so much of your job is rejecting films,
It's
even
awful.
that you love.
It's awful. There's no good way to say no all the time. And I think this is one thing we didn't talk about, and Andrea can probably agree with, is that don't ask a programmer what their favorite film is. They love all their children. I would guide donors because I know them and I know what they're looking for and what they might like. But we're not going to be like, this is my favorite film. Maybe when there's a little distance, but we can't do that. We're really trying to give an even slate to all those films that we're presenting. I loved your question so much.
Charles. You're muted, Charles.
Mute. Okay. Okay, thank you. So I'm here. I've got a specific question, which is the disconnect I've seen. Back in the 70s and 80s, we produced a lot of films that really did well at film festivals. We won the Grierson Award twice. A film premiered at the New York Film Festival that we did with Jackie Oakes on Vietnam and Agent Orange. We did a film called Lovejoy's Nuclear War that did tremendously and helped finance later films on the same subject and enjoyed widespread distribution, not really in theaters so much, but out there in the world. And we started distributing stuff and other people's films, and we did that.
Charles, because out of time.
Up until the minute. Well, the disconnect I'm interested in is I recently completed a film called Far Out, Life on and After the Commune, and started out in the same pattern of entering film festivals where the response has been lukewarm at best. However, I premiered it at the local theater, the Latches in Brattleboro. We had over 550 people there. They kept the film there for over a month. It did better box office than anything in the last 5 years, except for Barbie. So I got inspired, and I've taken it out throughout New England, really. We've had, or will have, theatrical showings in over 30 theaters, probably, put on the screen over 200 times. And the response has been amazing, and I've seen it in the theaters, in the audiences. People are rapt. They watch the whole thing. We usually start out with a premiere.
Charles, I've got to cut in and ask you to.
Well, I'm asking, what is the disconnect between the reaction I'm seeing in real time and the reaction of the gatekeepers at the?
I don't know what festivals you applied to, but I can say that it sounds like you did a great job of self-distribution, and you were able to go to very specific audiences that would be receptive to that film. So it's not necessarily the gatekeepers, but there are a lot of films that play in cinemas that are not appropriate for festivals. And it sounds like, again, you were able to use a scalpel and really identify where it's going to play well. And good for you, because not every film is a festival film. So I don't think it's about the gatekeepers saying no per se. I think it's that what you wanted to do there, what that film wanted, was self-distribution. And that's true of a lot of films, as opposed to the festival circuit, which is not the same as it was even 10 years ago, much less in the 70s and 80s. The festival circuit has changed. It is no longer just an arm into distribution. In fact, it's not that at all anymore. So it's a different conversation to be had, but good for you for doing self-distribution instead of you know, being satisfied with the festival saying no. That would be my answer.
I agree.
Deirdre and Andrea have kindly agreed to stay a little bit over time. So, and we have 5 more questions. So please keep your questions and very concise. Susanna?
Hi there. Unmute. Hi. 2 things. Does a festival programmer get turned off if a filmmaker asks for screening fees? That's number 1. And number 2 is years ago, I went to the Sundance Film Festival. I saw this film, and it was just basically somebody taking a camera and running into dust clouds. This went on for 45 minutes, and people in the audience started to leave, and then you heard tootsing from the audience, and it was like, I felt like it was a psychological experiment on how long can an audience sit and watch the same thing. And I was just wondering, how did they program this at Sundance Film Festival? Just your thoughts. I'm sure you don't know, but I thought out of so many beautiful films, they programmed a film of somebody running into dust.
Andrea, do you want to speak to that? Do you know what film?
Well, I don't know the film, so I can't speak to that, and I'm glad. I can't. So that one I can't answer for you, but it is subjective. So maybe X number of people thought it was the most fabulous thing ever. But one nice thing about festivals is that there's room for many different kinds of film and many different kinds of stories. So that's a good thing, I think. And as far as screening fees, festivals are all different. You can always, as filmmakers, you can always ask for this or that. I'm not part of festivals that pay screening fees, so you could certainly ask. It's not going to make anybody put a big X next to your name, so don't worry about that. But in general, I'm not a part of them that actually pay what some filmmakers are compensated in other ways, that are invited, you know, in other ways through lodging and travel and so forth, sometimes for DMs, things like that.
Deirdre, do you think it's sort of a post-COVID trend that festivals are struggling more and can't pay for airfare and accommodations in the way they used to?
Completely. And it's also, I mean, and when it comes to distribution, we have distributors going out of business, guys.
Yeah.
So like the model is, if you're not reading Ted Hope, if you're not reading Brian Newman, if you're not reading these people that are talking about what we need to do to have the industry move forward, I don't know what you're doing. So you should be reading broadly people that are writing about this right now, new ways of distributing, new ways of saving the independent business. That to me is where things lie. I mean, these are all very important discussions, and to think that a festival offered you fees or offered to fly you last year, but they're not doing it this year just because they're mean is, no, it's because everything's changed. We all know this.
I'd add Kathleen Lingo and Anthony Kaufman's Substack are both really top for that. Harry.
Hi. I am a veteran documentary filmmaker. I'm best known as the creator of Taxi Cab Confessions on HBO and also the HBO documentary American Winter. And I have a new film called American Hate, which is a documentary in which victims of hate crimes speak. And I have heard from different agents I know that the streamers and traditional TV outlets for documentaries are shying away from anything that is an indictment of Trump or Trumpism, and that they're sort of, you know, I wouldn't call it running scared, but putting their interest, their financial interest ahead, taking a chance on films like that. And my question, are festival programmers also being affected by that? And are any of them sort of inhibiting themselves from taking anything that is, you know, an indictment of Trump or Trumpism or the administration?
Deirdre, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this too. I think that, you know, it's I'm speaking very generally now, you know, it's a very real thing what's happening now, having funds withdrawn and rescinded. And I know, you know, I'm sure we all know people who've had pretty significant grants to make certain things all of a sudden yanked away. It's a very terrifying, horrendous time right now. And these threats are very real. So I think uh, a lot of conversations are going on. I haven't witnessed any actual not programming something because of it. Deirdre, do you want to speak to it as of yet? But these threats are very real and very frightening what's going on. And it's also kind of new, and every single day you're waking up to sort of a fresh new nightmare. So it's a very, you know, it's a very fresh ongoing conversation. Deirdre, what do you have to say on this?
I think if Netflix is spending $40 million to make a documentary about Melania Trump, then we know where they are. So I think be aware. But I also think, you know, for speaking for the Art House Convergence, we have just had 2 incidences where a government official has stepped into trying to change what an art house programs. In both cases, the film No Other Land, first the O Cinema by the Miami Beach mayor, and then a congressman in New York calling out the Jacob Burns Center, and specifically their programmer, Eric Hines, by saying which petitions he had signed, which is in both cases the very definition of censorship, which is when a government official tries to silence these things. We have other complaints that we're tracking at the Art House Convergence, which I won't get into because they haven't been as public. So yes, it's an issue. I would believe that there are certain festivals that will stand up to it and are powerful enough to do so. Look at who the sponsors are, look at who writes their checks, and I would go with God with that. But I would doubt, I mean, part of the wonderful thing about Full Frame was that we were at an institution of higher learning. They're all being sued and having their money taken away anyway. So I would hope that they were feeling like they could program something that is critical of anything, whether it's the administration or anything else public. But I can't say because I wasn't there this year. I was involved with the Minneapolis International Film Festival. And I don't know, but it's, I can tell you at Minneapolis, I was there to interview Ang Lee, and he asked me specifically to not talk about certain things that had to do with either Chinese or American politics with regard to his body of work. So it's real.
Yeah. 3 more questions. Sorry, Julia, we had to cut it off after 3, so I can't get to you. Nick, hello.
Hi, Nick.
Hey guys. Hey Deirdre, good to see you. Thanks for being here. Nice to meet you, Andrea. My question is actually kind of similar to the last one, which I'm glad was asked. And I just was wondering if you guys could speak more to just the general pressures that festivals feel that filmmakers might not know about, particularly when it comes to crafting the program, because so many festivals are international festivals, right? And I think the idea is they need to have a representative program from different parts of the world and different types of filmmakers. So like, how much does that play a role into crafting a program for a festival?
I can tell you that, you know, I'm not going to speak in real specifics about that because everything is like so fresh and like everything is like so the risks are very real. I can tell you that a lot of conversations are going on about how to handle these things, because if the one thing that I harbor great hope and optimism for is that this community of documentary filmmakers and documentary creators and creators in general, you know, creating art of any kind in general will be the people to, especially with a total lack of so little real journalism. It's the duty of artists, and I see this community coming together and really being able to push back in a way that can really stand up to things. But real conversations are happening because there's real money at stake. There's real threats at stake. You know, we've seen what can happen, and it's quite terrifying. But it's all so new that I think people are kind of holding cards a little bit closer to their vest right at the moment.
I will say for the international question, you know, for years, IDFA, Zurich, you know, Visions du Real, these places have been bold in their programming in the past, and I don't see that changing. There were films I would see at IDFA that would never play in the United States that were highly critical of large corporations we have. So I think they're still fighting. We have a component in Europe for the art house convergence, and they have a much more specific statement about the importance of the art house combating messages via government interference. So they're punching. We right now are still collecting things. I mean, even in Omaha, I remember having somebody come in and ask me to remove our Black Lives Matter poster, and I'm like, I'm not doing that, you know? So like, times are changing. It's almost daily. We all know that we don't have our NEA money anymore. So, you know, to a certain point, I think there's some organizations taking risks. I think there's some organizations that are doing that though with the advice of their boards. And I think Andrea's right. We're all looking day by day to see what's going to shift or change. But just like it was in the first administration that was similar to this, you know, you are seeing some uprising. I think it's just taking a bit of a minute to recalibrate what that's going to look like. And this past Sundance was a great example of that, right? We had the Women's March, you know, however many years ago it was at Sundance. And this year it was just a little more muted. And the issues are different. It's just, it's a different time.
Yeah. Two more questions, Ben and then Wellington, and then we are out of here.
Hi, thanks for taking the time. I had a quick, we touched on this earlier a bit about festivals wanting to keep content fresh. But I guess I have a personal example that I'm curious about how to approach in the future. So we were lucky enough to get accepted to Doc NYC. We had a short film. It's about 13 minutes called Limbo. And we had momentum building up to that. And then it aired at Doc NYC. And then our acceptances kind of fell off. We thought like that motion would keep going into the other festivals. But was that more or less, would you guys say that's kind of like the peak and maybe it's not worth using the budget for the remainder of festivals? Or have you experienced this or have any insight why maybe the acceptances have fallen off?
I can't speak to that particular film. I haven't seen it, but one thing that that might be helpful. I'm not saying this is going to make a difference, but one thing that might be helpful is to use the fact that it got into Doc NYC, and, you know, craft an email to programmers at different festivals, brief ones saying, want to put this on your radar. This is name of my short, log line thing, this play Doc NYC, that would, you know, help put the short on the radar of the programmer who knows that it got into another major festival, and that might help keep it on the radar. That might be to your benefit, but I don't know why that might be happening.
My only other comment would be Doc NYC falls towards the end of the fall festival calendar. And once you get to the end of the calendar, when the spring festivals come, we don't tend to look at those fall festival. We consider those old by then, that the life has moved on of that work. I also don't know which part of the Doc NYC program you were. If you were in that New York part, that probably is part of the reason. If not, and if you were in there broadly, for me, that would be it. Short festivals might be the way to go, though, ones that just focus on shorts. And maybe that's a different route to take, because then they're going to program more. You have a greater numerical chance even to get programmed that way. But for me, that would be the issue. Doc NYC is kind of at the end of that calendar.
Thanks. And for our final question, Wellington, big responsibility here.
Oh, thank you very much. And it's been educative, and I have learned a lot. Just to bring out my question. My question is more like a comment, and I'll probably say I'll stand for Africa. Most of the documentaries that we have in Africa, they don't usually go on, for example, on Sundance film festivals, on international platforms. But if you could see the documentaries, they're quite interesting and they're quite appealing. But at some point, they don't get through to the festival. So my question is it that because we're Black, or because we don't reach to the point of getting to the links of the managers or whomsoever who is responsible to get you into the festival? So I like, for example, I'm an agricultural filmmaker. I make a lot of films in terms of agriculture and climate change, and you could see that there's a lot of impact in what I do. But mostly I would do that for the government of Malawi. I'm from Malawi, Africa. So they would just use it to stream it on the like educative videos and stuff, but not to go into the festival, like things that could earn us some money, could earn us maybe recognition in the international film capacity or whatsoever. So I would just like to know what do we have to do for us to get into proper mainstream that international festivals or whatsoever? Maybe you could share some tricks or share some links that we can be able to get into the proper festivals. Thank you very much.
So we looked at links from all over the world. I mean, we're an international film festival, and at least Full Frame is, when I say we. But one thing that we're also looking at is, can we bring that festival, that director in? And that would be a high price tag for us to get somebody from that continent. I will say the great thing about the Toronto Film Festival is they have a programmer for every continent. So, they are literally looking at each continent separately, which is awesome. So Toronto, it's one of the things I admire most about the Toronto Film Festival, and I love that festival so much. But they're gigantic and they have a lot of money, and that's one issue. But it was always a struggle. Like we had, for example, a lot of films from Iran. Twice we had a film win awards, or 3 times from Iran, which has no diplomatic relationship with the United States. And then it would take me a year or so through the State Department to get that award money to the filmmaker. That's just like a small example of how difficult it can be when we have an international winner. And that's an extreme because it's Iran. But no, we've looked at films from all over. As long as they're coming through and they're clicking on our submission page, we're looking at them and considering them. Andrea.
Yep, same thing. All the festivals I work with are international, and we look at films from all over the world, take them all seriously, and I would say this make sure the story is gonna just shine, but everybody's, there are tons of international entries, and hopefully your film's getting considered on an equal level as everyone else's. I know we're looking at them.
Yeah, my own thoughts are this goes to every film. What is it about my story that appeals, to viewers everywhere? What is it that is universal in its appeal?
We'll add one thing that could be helpful, Wellington, because you work with the government, is that the film commission from different countries would often contact us and pitch films. Israel, Iran, Russia. I remember the Russian delegates telling us only 2 films they're allowed to go to, and one was Full Frame and one was Sundance. So the film commission of your country can also be helpful in taking their films as a block and saying, this is what we wish you would consider from our country. And I'd forgotten about that piece. So the film commission can be a big aid.
So Deirdre and Andrea, are there any final words before we leave? Anything that you want to say we haven't gotten to yet, or anything about your role as a programmer that you want people to take away?
Well, I can say that I want to thank everybody for wonderful questions and a wonderful conversation. It's been great being in your company. A lot of times with documentary films, people are very passionate about certain, say, issues or topics, for instance, climate change or things like that, things that are a topic, an idea, right? Passionate about ideas, say. And I want to emphasize that it's important to make sure that for whatever issue a filmmaker might be passionate about and want to get out into the world, make sure that there's a great story behind it. Make sure you bring it down to earth with a personal story rather than, say, a broad overview of an issue. Make sure that there are characters, there are participants that are compelling, that tell a story, that bring attention to that. That's going to be what captures your audience is compelling characters, a compelling element, a unique lens. And I always encourage people to, watch as many documentaries on your own as you can, films on your own, and kind of work from an analytical standpoint to kind of observe yourself. At what moment am I engaging with the story and why, right? Or what moment am I disengaging and why? And to be kind of aware of that process from an analytical, objective point of view, to kind of be able to articulate why other stories are working or not working for you, I think helps create better storytelling, or at least more awareness of kind of what is working. And my last thing I'll say is, never try and make a film because you think it's what the programmers want. Always make sure you're operating from the story you want to tell, from your unique voice. That's going to be what stands out. That's going to be what makes yours rise above the others, is going to be your unique voice, and not trying to figure out what you think programmers are looking for. It's making the film that speaks to you. That's all you. That's what I encourage.
Thanks. Deirdre?
I would say go to festivals, go to as many film festivals as you possibly can, particularly documentary only festivals. Just go. It's the best way to get a sense of how festivals run. There are bad actors out there. That's why we formed the Film Festival Alliance. Stick to their page, really learn about those festivals. Be careful with your resources. Take care of that baby that you worked so hard to build, so that it's really going to places where it will be appreciated. You don't want to just like apply willy-nilly. Really give as much strategy and thought to that as you did to every shot that's in your movie. And then the last thing is, don't expect festivals to do more than they can. What a festival can do now has changed. It used to be that, even the mid-sized festivals were launch pads into distribution. That has gone away. Those times are gone. And even those distributors are really narrowing their focus and what they're able to do. And they're suffering financially as well as the festivals are. So please don't think of it as a binary, the good guys and the bad guys. The filmmakers are the good guys and the festivals are the bad guys. They're not. Nobody would work for a film festival, which they're almost always doing for at a deficit, unless they really, really loved film and filmmakers. So please keep that in mind and stick to the D-Word. The D-Word is such a great resource of people sharing the festivals they love and where they're treated well. And like, hey, I went to this little festival and they were so awesome to me. Like, listen to your peers, because they're the ones that know. So thank you all for your time, and thanks to Eric and to Doug and Andrea and to everybody at the D-Word and all these very thoughtful questions.
Right, and just at last thought, as to Deirdre's point, we're all in the same community. Programmers, festival organizers, filmmakers, we're all part of the same community. Let's keep it that way. We're all part of the same community, and that's a wonderful thing.
As Erica noted in the chat, we do have a special festivals topic on the D-Word, and we talk about festivals all the time there. So do check that out. Deirdre, Andrea, thank you so much. You stayed like an extra half hour. I don't think we've ever had as many questions lined up when we ask for them as this one. So clearly, festivals is the big issue. So such a big issue for us in these times, and so appreciate what you do. And thank you for being here and sharing your experience and wisdom with us.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.